Kyle here from All Media Reviews. I'm here to try a live stream follow up, and I have a friend who might be joining us if I can figure this out. If I can to do a follow up to the Jazz Fusion list that I did last week, and let's see here. I'm trying to figure this out. Of course, this live streaming is a work in progress, but I think yeah. My apologies. Well, I guess I can just do this. That's the problem with trying to do this on the fly. But yeah, I have a bunch of honorable mentions. Let me just see what happens if I do this. This is always a work in progress if you haven't done a stream. Oh, that's right. You have to invite people. Copy. All right. Go to my YouTube page and see if this works. Yeah, okay. All right.
Testing. Hello.
All right. It took us only a minute. It's taken me much longer in the past to figure this out. I don't know who's going to actually find this right away, but at least they can find it later. But thank you for joining me, Christian, Frantic Dav.
How's it going, guys?
So, and if you don't know him, if you've been on Discord and Images and Words, actually, there's a connection with the Reddit prog rock group too, isn't it? Because it's always advertised on the side there, so you might know him. So under many guises, but Frantic Dev is the most common. But anyway, you've seen him on some of these group streams we've done, and he suggested we do a live stream for these like Jazz Fusion honorable mentions that that I was going to do after I did the top 53. So yeah, we are actually live, thankfully. I'm going to just leave this. So, all right. So, do you want to talk anything about this? I've had kind of a whirlwind of a couple days, but since we're doing a stream, we don't even worry about editing stuff out or whatever.
Oh, all right. Don't worry. No, I just wanted to shortly present myself. My name's Chris, just in case. Yeah, I think I usually talk with you in the Images and Words prog Discord, but I've known you since I think maybe even a decade or so in the old Mike Portnoy forum days, which was fun as hell. And well, mainly the reason I wanted to ask you about this, besides, well, the list that you posted is really, really good. It holds up pretty well with Al Di Meola, with many picks that I didn't even know at the point, but I sensed there was like a really, really, really big gap on a really specific subgenre within the Jazz Fusion part.
Yeah,
which I would love to hear about it, but obviously, if you want to talk about first your honorable mentions,
we could do that, I guess. First of all, I was just going to mention, this isn't the point. We could just talk a little bit about this, but yeah, I remember you on the forum. When you got into Kevin Gilbert, that was when I first noticed you were on there. Although I'll confess, look, we were talking on Facebook. There's another person that I used to get you confused with who had some connection with the Musical Box, because I was trying to promote. He was based in Montreal, because I think his name was Christian also. But no, the forum. I started there. That was 2000, and of course, talking to the Dream Theater community before that. But there's so many people on that community, and you could say the Dream Theater community in general, even progressive rock to some degree, that there's just they've weaved in and out historically. And so, yeah, there's like, even on the forum, you had these different generations. Even though
Hmm.
it wasn't at the very beginning, I saw so many people come and go. And so we know our friend Ray Beardsley, Waymouth, he
Hmm.
kind of was the moderator throughout that whole history too. But there's people that like knew him at the beginning, and knew him, up into the last days of the forum in 2017, and continued on Facebook. So,
Hmm.
no, I know, it's just there's like even our friend Alan too. But I mean,
Hmm.
come to think
Of
about
course.
it, you and Alan, I think, probably came onto the forum sometime in the mid 2000s, right? I
Yeah, I
think,
still, I one
yeah,
of the things that I remember the most was the hype moments before the score show, or like sort of
yep,
that kind of era.
2005. That was a big deal. There were
Yeah.
like these I mean, we're talking about Jazz Fusion, but the Dream Theater has those are these event concerts that happened for that window of time. It seemed like
Hmm.
the Roseland show in 2000, that was one of the big ones, and also that first tour, that the show that was at out in LA, where the fire marshal kicked everyone out before the encore, and Portnoy's trying to do vocals.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and then of course some of those like shows where they did the second night with the classic albums. But then yeah, the score show was one of those sort of event. I didn't go to
Hmm.
any of them. I'm guilty. I went to the tributes. I went to the Portnoy tribute for Rush and Zeppelin in
All
New
right.
York, but that was about it.
All right. Really
Um,
cool. But
so
yeah.
I guess, yeah, I think what you were alluded to it, but I guess we can kind of mention that in a little while. I can go over this, like my honorable mention list. I can just show the physical copies. It's not really. I mean, they were the way they ranked when I went on to Pub Meeple, but then I kept on remembering stuff that I did not have in there, and then I was just saying, thinking, okay, this is jazz fusion, jazz rock, but I like, and the thing is, I'll admit that my interest in jazz as a listener and a collector of physical items has been mostly jazz fusion.
Hmm.
It's so
Same here.
it's so closely related to progressive rock naturally, but like especially when the Ken Burns documentary came out. I mean, I played jazz before that. It made me like wanting to listen to just more of the history of jazz, and I honestly have never spent as much time as I wanted to, because I just haven't had time or whatever. So I started adding a few like titles that weren't necessarily jazz fusion, but I have Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker, the Town Hall, New York City. It's like considered maybe the most like highly rated Charlie Parker record.
Hmm.
It came out in 40. Was recorded in 45, but came out in 2005.
Dizzy
Um,
Gillespie is the jazz trumpetist that has the horn completely bent over, right?
yeah, and he had the big puffy cheeks and stuff. But I think a lot of people think of him for his like his sort of the Afro-Cuban jazz that he
Hmm.
kind of wasn't the first one, but anyway, that one I had on there, just although I'm still kind of familiarizing. I played trumpet, we played some Dizzy pieces, and he was one of the first ones to do Manteca.
Hmm.
Um so I had that. I have this. I don't know if did I grab that? I didn't grab that. I have a couple of Stefan Grappelli, the violinist, who had a big influence on people like Jean-Luc Ponty and everything. But
Hmm.
I have a Oscar Peterson and Stefan Grappelli live thing, but I didn't grab it. I grabbed this Stefan Grappelli, which I also have. We had a whole collection of vinyl, but yeah, I mean, he was renowned. I think he was Italian, but that was from '73 though. So I have Bitches Brew also from I don't know, that was from 1970, which a lot of people love that album more than in Silent Wind. That was kind of the birth of fusion.
Hmm.
Um, Herbie Hancock's Thrust from '74, another Al Di Meola album. I didn't grab the CD, but Casino. Let's see here, Charles Mingus Ahum. That's kind of the biggest, most popular Charles Mingus record. Is that from 1959? Let's see here, what else? I can go through this. It's only like 30 albums, but I have the band Mediatic's debut album right here. This is Elsewhere, again, local band that I fell in love with, and they broke up, of course, about 4 years later. But a lot of the tracks on this album, the debut album from like 2008, 2007, were re-recorded on the one that they followed up. But
Is that one of those albums that is like very hard to find online, or
I'm sure it isn't
maybe
easy. You
not
might be
even
able to
available
find it
on regular
on
streaming?
Bandcamp, because I mean,
Oh, yeah,
again,
they
it was
got a Bandcamp.
2012, 2013 when they broke up, so they might have been able to put their stuff on Bandcamp. But I mean, it's funny thing is I know people that know jazz in town that don't even talk about, like the Prague people don't even know this band, but I don't remember where I heard about them. But then I remember like buying this and like talking to someone in the band, and like they kept on doing shows, and I never got to see them for like 4 years. Then I finally get to see them. They put up their new record, and then they say, well, we're breaking up. Billy, the guitar player, is going to LA because he's going to do music for commercials. And so it's just the thing. But if you like heavy jazz fusion, this is like right up there. I mean, it's not Liquid Tension Experiment kind of virtuosity, but it's really great. I love them, but I can't even get my friends into them. So let's see here. I had Django. I have this CD, I think, because Django Reinhardt, the gypsy jazz stuff. I have this Django Reinhardt Quintet du Hot Club de France. So he was like a live thing from France. But I have that Paquito de Rivera, that compilation that I showed, the 94 list.
Yeah, that was another section but I think that could be a completely other different video, which is more like the Latin jazz area.
Latin and Africa, yeah. I haven't heard his solo albums. Maybe you have.
Yeah, I have. I'm trying to remember the main one, but I can't. It's like I have like the cover, because the cover is in my mental image right now, but I don't remember which. It was like a smiling moon, or he looks like with the moon in the background. But it's a really, really good record. I'm trying to remember. There's another jazz fusion artist that also very famous in the Latin scene. Not Paquito. Well,
not Pancho
maybe
Sanchez.
Rubén Blades has some kind of.
I think Paquito predated Pancho Sanchez. Tito Puente.
Tito Puente, of course.
Yeah, and that's another one that I've heard some, but I know Paquito better. But Pancho's a little later. Pancho like kind of started in the 90s. But I have a Jaco Pastorius.
Miquel Camilo is one that is highly recommended.
You'll think of it in a few minutes, or then bring it up. Yeah, the first Jaco album, which there was 2 albums, one called Jaco and one called the actual Jaco Pastorius. I think this one was more famous, but the thing is, he's a virtuoso, and I love him at times with Weather Report. But I got to admit, like some of his stuff, people were not like praised, like his stuff with Pat Metheny. I didn't get blown away by as much as I totally believe he is like the greatest, like sort of technical bass player ever.
I still have
I don't know why. I like the documentary that Robert Trujillo of Metallica did about him, but so let's see here. Weather Report's Night Passage. Here, there's one record I should show. I mean, I got some other stuff that
I think this is actually the only release that I have on Weather Report. I know they're really good, and I've listened on streaming and everything, but this one could be like a really good intro to them. I don't know if you've seen it.
It's the Victor Bailey era, I think, or might be Alfonso Johnson, because I think Alfonso Johnson predated Jaco, and then he may have came out back after Jaco left. And Weather Report's one of those bands. It's like where they had. It's just a revolving door, and there's so many. I mean, there's the 3 main guys: Wayne Shorter, Joseph Zawinul, and I'm spacing on the sax player Wayne. Anyway, but they had a lot of guys that went in and out, including Jaco. So I don't know. Night Passage has always been. I got that from the library many years ago, and I always liked it. But I came to kind of learn the 70s because I think it's like 81. The 70s stuff I liked a little more. But I think Weather Report, Night Passage was like the last like great Weather Report album for me. So, but this album, Fuse One, I was going to show. This was like one of those largely collaborative projects, like a lot of jazz fusion stuff came out like in 80, 81. And it was driven by a few people, but one being Larry Coryell, and actually the late Larry Coryell. I had him sign it when I saw him back like 2002. But it had McLaughlin, it had Stanley Clark, Tony Williams, Lenny White. It had a lot of big names. It even includes Jeremy Wall, who was with Spyro Gyra. So this has always been a favorite. I mean, I probably should have had this in the top 50, but I don't know. I haven't listened to it compared to some of these other ones. Bill Bruford I didn't have on my list because I've soured a little bit, and some of his stuff is arguably like prog rock as opposed to jazz fusion or the Earthwork stuff. But I do have the Bruford tapes.
Amazing album. That was my first Bruford album.
And it has Hell's Bells, of course, which that's the song I always think of it for.
Biggity, biggity, biggity,
Do,
biggity,
do,
biggity.
do, 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 do. And then I
Oh,
have one other record
that's
from
Beelzebub.
him. I think what maybe some people consider that his best, although it's weird. And he had like, what is it? He had Alan Holdsworth, who I'm gonna have reservations with. I didn't used to, but then who is it? Jeff Berlin, I think, on a few of these records. But I have one of a kind also, and I think I have Feels Good to Me on the stack, but I'm missing the CD. So at one point, I was like collecting the Bill Bruford, the Bruford discs. But I have to admit that after revisiting them, some of these in the albums of the year stuff, they're not as good as to me as some of the better fusions. I mean, they're okay. And again, I'm kind of like been having issues with Alan Holdsworth. That's why I haven't. Maybe when I first heard him, I didn't have as much of an issue. He feels like he's just a guy who's doing chops. I know people that love him, rest his soul, Alan Holdsworth, and he played with so many different people. But I don't know. You probably rate Bruford higher than I do.
Well, in my case, obviously, with going into Bruford is mostly the Yes and the King Crimson parts. But when he started to do the solo stuff, it was basically my small introduction to most of the general jazz fusion parts. So I'm very fond of those records. But I completely understand when people go like, well, yeah, Holdsworth's a bit way too in there, so it's way too wild, and completely understood. And I think the same thing happened with Bruford. I think Holdsworth even left after the first.
He might have.
He left, and
I saw him live. I know he had Earthwork stuff, but I mean, part of it, it's like, I'll admit, when I got into fusion about 20 years ago, it was like the early 2000s. I was like, okay, Bruford's another one I need to just kind of invest the time with, and I did like it. So I mean, part of it, I haven't listened to this stuff in a while, and then I revisited it, months ago when I was doing those albums of the year, and I'm like, this is kind of boring. It's okay. There were a few moments. I had a similar feeling with UK, although I felt like the second UK album, Danger Money, has a little more depth to it. I think some of it's Eddie Jobson on that. But,
yeah, definitely.
I don't know. I mean,
I'd even consider it a jazz fusion record. Danger Money at many points.
Oh, right. Well, that's it with UK. I always felt like UK was basically Wetton and Bruford wanting to do Crimson-like stuff without Robert. Like a different version of that, and it was it's like a mixture of like ELP and Crimson at points, but not with all the players in both those bands. Hiromi, I don't know if you know her. A lot of people praise her. Japanese, I think she was Japanese born, but I believe she resides in New York City. Virtuoso, who's played with like Stanley Clarke and a lot of, I mean, she's sort of like a Chick Corea type. I got her to sign this. I saw her at the Dakota many years ago.
Yeah,
I don't know if you're David Kuczynski from Screaming Headless Torsos, and she's great. I mean, she has like 10 albums, so I don't know. This is the one that I consider her best. The Time Control.
Yep. Same one I'm holding up right here.
Oh, you have it. Go figure. I think this is maybe consider her least most commercially successful debut, right? one.
Not Beyond Standard. Beyond Standard is also really good.
I mean, she's been here too, and I didn't go, and I don't know. At some point, I may feel more like I've been sleeping on her, but I've been getting more into, I don't know, the likes of like Esperanza Spalding, who are exactly purely jazz, but are kind of these female artists that really can play. Yeah, I have. Let's see here. I've got. Let's see the Dixie Dregs album. Yeah, Free Fall, the Dixie Dregs album, the first one. I think it's the first one.
David
not
exactly. Not exactly. The first one was an album called The Great Spectacular that didn't got released until way later.
Oh, was it?
But
okay.
Freefall was like their first signed album.
So their first label released.
Their first label release. Let's call it that way. To me, What If would be their best record.
That's the one I think that's the one that has the longer version of Cruise Control.
Does it?
I think because it's what is it? The one from '81 had the edited version. Because that's the one I had on my list. I listened to that last week. Dixie, where are they? Yeah, I had that on my list at. Trying to go through this here. Not very. Free Fall was 77. Yeah, I had it number 48. So, I like them. I feel like their later stuff. Like I listened to a record after that, one of the records after that, and it was like basically taking bits from different prog bands. I mean, it only was like a few years after, but like this bit sounds like Kansas, this bit sounds like ELP. Where's the I couldn't hear the southern part, and they don't really have like a bluegrass element, unlike this band, the modern band, who are doing sort of southern bluegrass. They call them jazz fusion grass. Galactic Cowboy Orchestra, another local band, just like Media Addicts. And this is
I got an interesting story about that one. I bought it
the whole
on
thing
accident.
with Galactic Cowboys, of course, and the fan base.
I thought it was a Galactic Cowboys record, and I bought it. And then I heard it was like, this isn't Galactic Cowboys, but this is really good.
It is really good. I mean, they did covers of King, like 21st Century Schizoid Man and a couple others, and the violinist who's married to John Wright, Lisi, has become this massive Rush fan in the last like 15 years. But no, they're an adventurous band, and the prog rock scene have actually gotten into them to some degree. They played at Prog Day, I want to say about 10 years ago. So, but yeah, they're absolutely nothing to do with Galactic Cowboys. Although if I would have given John Wright advice 15, 16 years ago about what name to name the band, I would have said maybe choose a different name, because
not Galactic Cowboys.
Galactic Cowboys, Galactic Cowboy Orchestra. There's also Galactic, that jam band, but yeah, they're great. They're fun band, but they have like a southern, you call it's bluegrass. They have because of the violin mostly. But I noticed that Dixie Dregs doesn't really have bluegrass in their sound. But they have like a southern kind of, I don't know if they use like banjo, like Bella Fleck.
I think they don't, but maybe Steve Morse, by his solo albums, he did later, but I'm not exactly sure.
And those were still jazzy, but I felt like those were more like shred albums. I mean, maybe they weren't entirely, but whereas having Andy West with the Dixie Dregs or the Dregs, they seem to still have the enough jazz elements to kind of classify them as jazz rock or whatever. I have a few others, like the Miles Davis album, A Tribute to Jack Johnson. That one's renowned. David Sanchez and Tone. David Sanchez is a keyboard player that played with Bruce Springsteen, but he has a solo career of his own. I think he may have played with some of the guys in Kansas at one point, but his album True Stories. And then, I have like Thelonious Monk's Brilliant Corners, Chick Corea's Children's Songs, Lato and Wright, John Wright from Galactic Cowboys, his other band later. They did an album called Children's Songs, which was played an arrangement of that piece. One cool
mention about that one, that we mentioned Hirome Uehara before that. She has a duet album with Chick Corea called, I think it's even called Chick or duet or something like that. Is really, really good. If you want like more like of a jazz, not a jazz, more like of a piano jazz competition, like going back and forth.
Sorry, but who are you referring to exactly?
Chick Corea and
I thought you said her. Chick. He did, yeah. He had a with who did he do the duet with? I mean, he did a lot of duets. In fact, are you talking about this one? Duet. No, that's not the one I was meaning to show, because I did grab the Leprechaun from him. And I have a couple of other records, the Mad Hatter. I mean, he has so many records. That's the thing, is I've spent less time with his just like own albums. But I do have Bright Size Life, as much as I feel like this is overrated. This is the first Pat Metheny, not the Pat Metheny group, but this does have Jaco Pastorius on it. It's really more stripped down. This is like Metheny just doing kind of even post-bop stuff. And Lenny White from Return to Forever, his album, I think it's called Big City. And then, of course, you mentioned this. This is the Love and Devotion album with John McLaughlin, Carlos Santana, which is like a tribute to John Coltrane, which I don't have any Coltrane on my list, and I'm kind of guilty of that. But I did check out Love Supreme many years ago from the library, and frankly, I was bored to tears with it. People love Love Supreme. I know that's a famous, renowned, maybe the most, that or maybe Kind of Blue, the most famous jazz album in history. But Dean McGraw,
is it a jazz fusion record? Is like, no.
It's like free jazz, and I'm not really that much of a Sun Ra person either. The free jazz stuff, I don't love. There's an album from Pat Metheny called Song X, which that was one of the most boring things I've ever got. I was like, this is right at the peak of when I was checking out Pat Metheny music. I realized not everything from Pat Metheny I'm gonna like, and it was free jazz. A lot of it's free jazz. It's like avant-garde, Henry Cow kind of stuff, and Love Supreme kind of was not quite out there, but it was of the same ilk. I'm like, but I'll say Dean McGraw, local musician who I'm a super fan of, has done live interpretations of some of the Coltrane stuff that was freaking great. It's not necessarily the sax parts, but he plays guitar or sitar. He'll do certain parts. And I was like, well, Coltrane, I give him credit. It's just his own music hasn't really clicked with me. So, I mean, that's about it. I have a long list of other stuff, like Oregon's, one of their other records. That was on my rankings, though. Garage Mahal, they have an album called Mondo Garage from 2003. They're a jazz fusion group. Bella Fleck, of course. Brand X, or Unorthodox Behavior. I love Marscape. Haven't spent nearly enough time with Brand X. I know people love Brand X, the stuff that they did, Phil Collins and those guys. Jan Hammer's Oh Yeah album. Then you talk about how loose you want to get. Steely Dan, the Royal Scam, or you can put on Asia. On there.
It's like partially some stuff is jazz fusion, some stuff is more like smooth jazz kind of a thing.
Right. I just think they were good songwriters. I like a lot of their songs. I don't know if I look at their songs as being jazz or jazz fusion in the same way I think of Pat Metheny or Return to Forever. But Tony Williams' Lifetime, which I kind of squabble between Believe I and Emergency. Most people like Emergency more, but I think I like Believe I, the later one, more. He played with Miles Davis, but then he went on. He had big names on those records, of course. Lyle Mays' solo album from 1986, self-titled. Scott Henderson, Jeff Berlin, and Dennis Chambers, HBC. Some Larry Coryell records, Spaces and Barefoot Boy. The Pneumatic Trans.
The connection.
How are you doing?
It just made a blip on the connection.
I think it can get reset. So all right. So that's about it. I mean, I'll post the list in the comments maybe later. Stanley Jordan's Magic Touch. I've never been that into Stanley Jordan. I know people that love him. Snarky Puppies, We Like It Here. Corey Wong and Dirty Loops, of course. Annie, Turbo album. This one right here. I didn't even show that. These two albums. Mike Linden, who I've told you about. That band, they put out the record last year. Mike Linden's from Minnesota, but he met these guys, and JP Bouvet, he's in the band. They worked with Courtney Swain. I'll look it up real quickly here. He's part of the band that I've trumpeted. I can't even think of their name. They went to Berkeley. But they were in a band called the Super Pilots that never released a full length. Let's see here. You know what I'm talking. You know the band I'm talking about.
I'm blanking out right now.
It'll come to me.
When was it? Tony Linden, right?
No, Mike Linden, JP Bouvet. There's like one or two tracks on this that reminds me of Marillion and Pink Floyd. But this Bubble and Squeak record I love. But they had the guy the singer who sounded a lot like Jeff Buckley, but now they have a new singer. Here, I know where to find it. I'll just look at the 23 list. But I know people got into them. But I wouldn't call them purely jazz fusion. They're more like prog jazz, like a lot of these bands, like proggy jazz or jazzy prog. Where is it? Here's the 23 list.
Found it. Bubble and Squeak, is it? The album.
Yeah, Bubbles, but this is a different band. They put out an album last year. I can't believe this is the 22 list. I'm looking on the wrong link. Oh geez. They're supposed to put out an album this year too, potentially. So that might help. Shoot. Well, I could show the other one I was going to show was Negroni's Trio. This band I heard on local radio a few years ago, and they're not fusion in the purest sense, but the great use of piano, great staccato. It's not just pure jazz. It kind of goes off in different sections. Their album On the Way, this is their album from 2012 or something like that. They're from Florida, but what's the name of that band? This is the problem I always run into. They put out.
You'll remember it at the most
Well, come to me right after the stream's over if I don't look this up. And so I know people can relate to this experience where, not Terminal 3, although that's Greg Harris's. Of course, the Reign of Kindo, who you could argue are jazzy. The Reign of Kindo, just like Snarky Puppy. Childish Japes. That's I've mentioned Childish Japes to you and talked about. I didn't do any reviews. Childish Japes, remember that? Maybe you don't remember that from last year.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, Mike Linden was not in Childish Japes, but JP Bouvier was in Childish Japes. But it's in Childish Japes. But they were in a band called the Super Pilots that I saw at this jazz festival about 7 or 8 years ago. I know my wife was like not happy that I went to this thing. It was a free thing. One of the members of Weather Report were there too. One of the Brecker brothers. But anyway. So then the Super Pilots were done, and then I found out, though they're from here, though, but they live out in New York, but a couple of members were from Apple Valley, Minnesota. So then I hear the guitarist's name is Mike Linden. He's living in New York City. I friend him on Facebook, and he puts out the Soul album, which was with basically members of Super Pilots. I don't know what he's been doing since. He has a dog, look like my old dog. But anyway, JP Bouvier then does a collaboration with Courtney Swain from Bent Knee and this new band called Childish Japes. And then they put out that record from 2018, which I loved, Salamander, which the singer, Dave Vives, is like one of the best, like Jeff Buckley-like singers I've ever discovered. And then, of course, last year they had the record, what is it? A Matter of Life and Death Part 1, featuring Joanna Teeters, and Part 2 may be coming up. So, yeah, I mean, they could be, I would think, given that we love Annie's love of dirty loops and everything like that, the connection, I would think Annie, actually, our friend Annie would probably enjoy Childish Japes. So, yeah, definitely. But that's about it. So, yeah, if you want to go and talk about the stuff that I missed, that specific genre, that I didn't talk about.
But it's easy to not dismiss, but it's easy to overlook most of them because, well, as I mentioned, your list kind of much covers pretty much to the T. Oh, this is jazz fusion in that area. You cover Weather Report, you covered Al Di Meola, you've covered, I'm trying to remember, maybe mentions of Dixie Drex or mentions of Alan Holdsworth or any others. And in my case, it's more like there are some modern ones, like, for example, anything that's usually with Guthrie Govan. I don't know if you've heard him as a guitarist.
Yeah, I saw the Aristocrats live once, and of course I know him from Steven Wilson's albums. Those whatever it was, he was on the Raven, and he was on Hand Cannot Erase, I think. But
I think he's in Raven and Hand Cannot Erase. Yeah. But his debut solo album, I don't know if you've listened to it, Erotic Cakes.
No, I haven't.
That was a really blown out jazz fusion record.
Okay. All right. I didn't dislike him. I didn't pursue it, but yeah, I mean, I know him from the Aristocrats, which I just kind of feel like they're okay. They're not necessarily bad. I wanted to meet Brian Beller too, who actually, Kevin Gilbert connection. He collaborated with Kevin Gilbert on the Stanley Snail Siberian Kotru, but Brian Beller's in the Aristocrats with Guthrie. But I've never heard that record you're talking about. I probably should then.
Erotic Cakes, really, really good record. Another one, another artist that got really famous in the prog scene, who's really into jazz fusion world, who played, I think, with Alan Holdsworth on his last tour, Virgil Donati. Really recommended Just Add Water. And
Dream Theater, Auditioner, and Planet X, of course. I didn't have Planet X on my list.
Yeah, it's like at this point, it's like really the line is really fuzzy because it's prog rock, it's prog metal, prog rock, or it's jazz fusion.
Should Liquid Tension Experiment be on a jazz fusion list? Yeah, I know.
But definitely, if you want to check out Just Add Water, that one's a really wicked jazz fusion record. Actually, I think now that I remember, I think I saw him at like one of his last shows. Alan Holdsworth, Virgil Donati. I'm trying to remember who was playing keyboard at that point.
Was it McAlpine?
Yeah,
I saw Planet X about
was it 2000. I remember. Yeah, in my case, it was like 2015. It was on the Cruise to the Edge, and it was one of the last shows of the evening. I remember they even had to stop for technical matter because it was too windy outside. Oh, wow. And I think like a couple of months passed, and he passed away. Alan.
That's really sad. Well, at least you got to see him before he did. But I know that experience a little bit. There's been a few artists that I got to see, and then they were gone.
I remember Nectar was the same thing with the main dude of Nectar. Let's see what another artist that's also really famous in the prog world. Obviously, Gavin Harrison. I don't know if you check out not his solo stuff, but most of his material that he uses for teaching. In my case, I'm like a more of a reluctant drummer. He usually uses a lot of jazz fusion elements on his teachings. And one of his albums called "Cheating the Polygraph" is actually really interesting because he's like grabbing really well-known Porcupine Tree songs and making really jazz fusion arrangements to it, and it's a really fun record.
I remember on the K-Scope podcast they interviewed him about that very record. And that was, and then that track, I believe, ended up on Nil Recurring. I think it was on Nil Recurring, which was the extra tracks that didn't end up on Fear of a Blank Planet. I know what it was like, rearrangements, reinventions, of Porcupine Tree pieces. I think I did listen to some of it, but I mean, it didn't like resonate me to like go back, even though it was like, okay, it's Porcupine Tree. But I remember it. I remember more for the title than anything else.
Another one, Lalle Larsson, which is a Swedish keyboardist. I think he got really famous playing with Flower Kings dudes, with Royne, and with others. Really, really good jazz fusion records. Dave LaRue, of course, which he is in the Dixie Dregs and plays on a lot of occasions with Steve Moore's band. Also has a solo, really good jazz fusion solo record. Another one you don't expect, Trevor Rabin. I know his arrangements are more poppy on the side, especially on his solo records, even on the new one. But I don't know if you've checked out the instrumental album called Jacaranda. That one's really full.
I haven't listened. I mean, Trevor Rabin, a friend of mine who's a big fanatical Yes-aholic, is very versed in his solo stuff. And I've never been that into the Rabin Yes, so that's probably why I never pursued his own solo stuff. But although I did see, was it ARW live? So I did get to see him live once at least, but he wasn't doing that. Obviously, he was doing the Yes stuff. I believe it. I used to talk about how Rabin was like the king of pop or something. It's like, all right, not Michael Jackson. I can't remember what my friend's quote. It wasn't that he was the king of pop. He was like, but if you do someone who knows how to do pop, you should work with Trevor Rabin.
Hey, he was really well sought out at that moment as a producer.
Yeah.
Let's see.
I remember that was the thing about him joining Yes. He didn't really want to join Yes. He wanted to like work with them. But he's like, well, all right, I'll write some songs with you guys and see what happens. And suddenly he's with Yes and the main guitarist and singer.
Yeah, and what was the name of the Eddie Jobson was at some point, and that moment was part of Yes, and he
lasted
like 2 weeks.
Well, but okay, so he was like a Jonathan Mover. Jonathan Mover from Marillion was Eddie Jobson with Yes, but Eddie Jobson worked with so many people. He was with obviously
exactly.
Besides UK, I think of him for Roxy Music, but then. Was he with one of the more modern prog bands, or did he work with like XTC? I can't remember. He's got other stuff in his discography and I forget. But I have to admit though, I mean he's fantastic he's the best part of those UK albums besides maybe Wetton's vocals. As much as I love Bruford, I thought, wow, Eddie Jobson steals this track. He's the best part of this track. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. I mean, the modern stuff is like the heavy fusion, prog metal fusion. Exevious, you could put down, or you want to put Cynic in there because they were jazzy,
or Soft Machine, for example. I mentioned the Soft Machine albums. I mean, many people consider them like really proggish, but in the end, they're like really weird jazz.
You could say not all, but a lot of the Canterbury stuff was jazzy. So is that fusion? I don't know. Is it jazz rock? I have a Phil something in cahoots. Where did I was looking for my CDs before I came out. I turned on the computer tonight and I found that CD. I'm like, oh, maybe this makes sense because it was one of the guys, Phil something from Soft Machine. I was sent that CD when I was volunteering at the radio station. I remember. But I mean, Soft Machine. I love the third record. I have a couple of the other records. I can't really claim to have even spent that much time. I know fourth is like considered their first jazzy record. But they're another one of those bands, and they just morphed out because there was like Caravan and the different matching mold, these different bands that offshoot from Soft Machine. So I did get to see them live, and I got the CD from a few years ago, which I don't know if I would call that jazz fusion. It's just more like prog.
Yeah, that's the thing. That line is like really, really, really fuzzy at points. And of
It
course,
is. I mean, to me, the stuff in the 70s is a little more definitive. It's not exactly, but it's closer. I mean, you want to put Relayer on there as a jazz fusion album too, but whereas once you get past like 8, it's like, and then you get into like, poppy stuff and like Steely Dan too, and then into the modern prog stuff. Is this is really jazzy? So is it jazz fusion or is it progressive rock? What is it? Liquid Tension.
The same thing, for example.
What about the two King's X related projects, Platypus and Jelly Jam?
Yeah, you could call them jazz fusion, although it's more on the prog metal side of things, kind of more sided with Derek Sherinian's
I have this CD.
Oh yeah, Basil Evans Stevens.
Yeah, I mean, it's a mixture of like heavy rock or fusion or heavy metal and fusion. I don't know. Remember that band Niacin? They were kind of jazz fusion for a little while. People were talking about them.
Or another one that people do not expect, Frank Zappa. At some point, he
got
like a really specific jazz fusion.
He had probably
in the
like
early
half
70s.
a dozen jazz fusion albums, probably. But I think because Hot Rats is the one that I know, and maybe it's got most famous at least. But
I do highly suggest you check out the ones that he made after Hot Rats. They're called Waka Jawaka and the Grand Wazoo. Those ones were at a moment where he was bedridden and he was
depends on how much humor
from an injury, and he went like, "Oh, I'm just gonna make an instrumental jazz fusion kind of a project."
It really depends on how much humor.
There's nothing, only the track names, because I think most of it is instrumental.
Oh, really?
Yep.
I'm gonna do something here quickly. I'm gonna share this. Yeah, I mean, it would make sense given the fact that Hot Rats was so jazz fusion-y.
There's also Jazz from Hell, which is interesting. The only issue is if you like really electronically oriented material, because he's using the synclavier like on everything on that record, so everything sounds really dated.
Oh, really?
Like really, like really specific synth patches.
Which is that was like right when Miles was doing
early.
The going into the electric fusion. Hold on. Let's just see here. Let's share that there. Yeah, I mean, there was a lot. I mean, this thing is when you're checking it out, and my friends were like saying, "Well, no, you have to hear this, this, and this." It's Bella Fleck jazz fusion. I mean, is it? It's bluegrass of some kind that's sort of being progressive, and they do jazz. And then you could just say, well, what about a lot of the jam bands? Some of them are more jazzy than others, I guess. I don't know.
In that case, with the jam bands, it gets crazier and crazier the more you look into it. But anyways,
I mean, I wouldn't call like the Grateful Dead necessarily jazz fusion, but
they have
Humphreys McGee get jazzy at times. So I don't know. That's why the jazz fusion. I just like to say jazz and like mostly fusion. But I just think that I've heard a lot of that stuff. More of the other kinds of jazz I haven't heard as enough of. That's why I'm sort of interested in hearing more, especially of like Afro-Cuban stuff and the Latin jazz. Flamenco too. Flamenco is one that there's probably a lot more of it that I've never heard. I know the Carmen record.
Yeah, you mentioned that one, and I really like that one. Although it was weird because I went to look for more information about them, and they're British. I thought they were like Italian or maybe
sound like they should
like Andalusian or stuff like that, but they're British.
And I haven't heard the other. We played some of that on the radio about 20 years ago, and I was like, "What the hell is this?" This is. I remember one of my friends did not like it. The other friend liked it. The other friends didn't like it, but yeah, that was the first time I'd heard that. I actually hearing that album from Tears for Fears, or technically it was Tears for Fears, but it was really Roland or however it's those names. Orzabal. Raul the King of Spain. So that one track that is absolutely flamenco. Well, there's only like a 2-minute section, but it totally hits the spot. a friend and I went to this club years ago to watch flamenco dancing, and while I enjoyed it, it was like so loud, like the tapping and the clapping, that he was just like repulsed. I was like, Kyle, I don't want to ever do that again with you.
Oh yeah, it tends
But
to happen.
but I mean flamenco, even like Spanish guitar, some of the, I mean, there's a lot of it that I've never heard. That totally like that hits the spot. It's kind of like when Pat Metheny is kind of doing his sort of synthy kind of guitar trumpet sounding guitar parts. It's just a general sort of atmosphere and tone that totally gets me. And flamenco is one thing. I mean, or like Joey Eppard from 3, of course, live, and that song Brahma Futura, that is totally flamenco. He's doing the tapping on the, on the bass of the acoustic guitar and everything. I think flamenco is something that more people should talk about. I think maybe outside of the U.S. it's more popular. Latin countries,
or even integrated to the specific genres. Trying to remember not only 3. I think OK Good Night had some certain sections that they incorporate some of the flamenco kind of a thing. There's another.
I listened to a little bit of that. I remember listening to that record of some of the songs on it last year, and I was it wasn't grabbing me enough to go back to it. But now that you mentioned, I probably should still.
Yeah. And now for the big thing, because I don't know if you noticed, but I usually, when I comment on your videos, I usually pick like 30 or 40. But this one, it went like, whoa, there was a lot of them. And there was one specific subgenre in the jazz fusion part, which is Japanese jazz fusion. All right. The thing with
Japanese fusion.
The thing with Japanese jazz fusion is most of the people tend to, like, not confused, but there's also a very fuzzy line between what is Japanese jazz fusion, jazz funk, and the city pop kind of a thing. With city pop, they usually do use certain influences from the jazz fusion records, obviously, but it's like kind of a mostly mix. So I'm just gonna concentrate more on the jazz fusiony, jazz funk kind of a record. So let's see. The main band that I highly recommend you check, and I don't know if you checked lists and everything, and people rave all over this band, Cassiopeia. Definitely check them out.
I know. I mean, of course, that's like a consolation or whatever.
But
the name's familiar. I don't think I've ever heard of them though. They're one of the big Japanese jazz fusion bands.
Probably it's the biggest one. It's not necessarily my favorite, but it's the one I'm usually easy to collect because most of the people do like repressings and there's a lot of things available for them. But yeah, if you need to check them out, this is their debut record, the one that people call, this is their best record. I kind of disagree, but it's an amazing kind of record. The thing with Cassiopeia that many people kind of like tone down is like they got really hectic jazz arrangements, but at certain points they calm down, they smooth out, and they get into a really smooth jazz kind of a part. And many people go like, I don't like this or stuff like that. And it's really, really solid record. This one,
I'll have to check them out. I mean, I like the name.
The other one?
Smooth, quote unquote, smooth jazz or like the elevator jazz. You're talking Kenny G. That's one reason why I've been gun shy about Stanley Jordan to some degree. People love him. Is jazz in the 80s went kind of just smooth, kind of too bright and happy, all major key kind of stuff.
Even that's one thing that you will notice with this.
I don't know, like using like the soprano saxophone especially. But
okay, that one is considered their best record, but to me, like for a first-time beginner, to you as a first-time beginner of the band, I think this one was like a meme at some point. Mint Jams, highly recommended. This is after their 4th record. It's a live record, but that way you can really see that they're really better live, not as a studio-only band. They're really good at like having rapport live and doing like switching interactions, switching instruments, stuff like that.
Yeah, that's generally a product of jazz. That's interesting because I love the actual, like whenever we make lambs, or I used to years ago, I used to add mint jelly, and I've mentioned this to my wife, and she thinks it's just repulsive. I'm like, no, mint jelly tastes great, especially on lamb. But that cover makes me think of that. But
I'm trying to look for a really specific record that I cannot find.
I assume you don't have any Tokyo Jihen or any
No, I've
Mexico.
tried searching for them, but they're kind of complicated to get to.
There's I don't even know if any of their records have ever come. They've only been around since like 2000. But they're, I mean, I would call them a jazz fusion of a sort, but I wouldn't call them because they have the female singer, they have a little different element than just the jazz fusion. But given you're talking about Japanese jazz fusion, that's the name that comes to my mind.
Yeah. All right, another one record that I highly recommend you check out. That is from another. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing any Japanese names for anyone in the audience who's like, oh, it's pronounced this way or the other way. This one from a dude called Masayoshi Takanaka.
That name's familiar. I've never heard it.
Really,
but
really good. If you search videos of him, he is usually mostly very flashy in the way he plays, and usually he uses very flashy instruments. Like, for example, if you search for him in YouTube, the most famous video is him playing a surfboard guitar, or like a piano, or like a train set guitar, or like really random wackiness stuff of it. But
so it's like
I consider it one of the best.
It would be interesting if it's surf rock or surf jazz.
Yeah. Most of his influence actually comes from Brazilian music. I'm trying to remember the genre specifically, but this record is like the easiest one to get to if you're like a prog or jazz fusion fan. Not his best. Well, many people do consider his best, but my favorite of him would be this one, Brazilian Skies, which is definitely, he went full in with the Brazilian vibe. I think he even samba. It's mostly jazz fusion combined with samba sounds.
So it's like a Japanese musician doing Latin jazz.
Basically.
Interesting.
And it's really fun. I think even one of the songs, he even does a Star Wars cover. And like, oh, let's do it all.
You know, I was just thinking, because, you know, a lot of the Japanese, they call it J-pop, you know, not all of it, but some of it really strongly draws from like oldies pop, like 50s pop. You ever hear of the band Malice Miser?
I've heard of them.
Yeah, because I remember my friend gave me some of their music on a cassette tape years ago, and I was like, this kind of sounds like it should have been played on the radio in the 50s. So I kind of always think, and Sheena Ringo included, some of her music very retro, drawing from that inspiration. I wonder if some of this stuff also is drawing from that period of time. Yeah. I think a lot of Japanese music has like this old traditional kind of influence. So that doesn't surprise me so much that they would, you know, surf music, surf rock, you know.
And kind of incorporated with their own influences in the Japanese scene and with Brazilian influences. Or you can tell that most of these guys are influenced from a ton of places. These other two, I highly recommend it. Also from, let me center them a bit. Seychelles, and this one was, I'm trying to remember, Insatiable High.
We're going to have to put these in the chat or in the comments just to remember.
Yeah, definitely. These two. Now that you mentioned, it was another artist, which actually isn't Japanese, but he went to Japan to make a couple of records. Jorge Dalto. I think he's from Argentinian descent, and he made this one, which is called Super Friend, not Super Friends, New York Nightline, which is a really, really really laid back kind of a jazz fusion-y record. Highly recommended this one, and his other record called Rendezvous. I've noticed, especially in the Latin American scene, especially the Argentinian scene, that most of them like kind of got big in Argentina or in Chile or in the specific parts, and they go like, well, let's try to hit a bigger market. So they always try the U.S. Most of them make it,
and they don't make it to the U.S. Unfortunately.
Look at Pat Metheny.
That's kind of why like Hiromi was sort of an outlier. Like, how you have the singer from Deerhoof move here or whatever. You know, I know what you mean. There's a lot of music from, you know, not just Latin America, but that's definitely one area which just doesn't break here. You know, it has to be like metal or something like that. Because like a friend of mine, I don't know what happened to this guy. He was from Liberia. I think it was Liberia, but he lived here. He was raising kids. It's this guy named Motobo. my friend was like babysitting and like living with him and his wife. He had all these tapes, like going back to the 70s from all these bands from where he was in Liberia. None of them like ever made it here, though, of course. But that just goes to show that like Western culture, Western civilization, Western media, Western sort of entertainment is very much in a vacuum because there's so much stuff that we don't ever get to hear. You know, I'm sure it's the other way around where they don't get access to everything we have here. But I know I always wondered about that. Like, I wish I could get in touch with this guy Moto. He was a big Tangerine Dream fan. That was his like favorite band of all time.
But actually, don't be surprised because most of, for example, all these bands that I mentioned, or many from Latin America, they are very much influenced by what's coming in from America, from the UK, from Germany, from many other places.
There's rock and Espanol, of course. There's that, but I don't know. I mean, you may be right, but I know. And part of it's like you look at Rate Your Music. This is I discovered with Japanese pop, especially about 10, 15 years ago. And there's like just hordes of names that you've never heard of, but they have releases. And like you had to go to those countries to actually find their music to buy, or you have to go on and import it for like a mint. Unless if someone has it on Discog that's willing to sell it.
Yeah. The other way around happens too. Like, for example, in this record from Jun Fukamachi, is it Fukamachi? Yeah, Fukamachi, John Fukamachi, On the Move. It's definitely a Japanese jazz fusion influence, but if you check the track list, the credits behind it, like on tenor saxophone, we got Michael Brecker. On alto saxophone, David Sanborn. You got Randy Brecker. You got many of the really like high.
Well, if you get names like that, if you get names like that, then they'll probably end up, finding their way overseas. All I know is like those Tokyo Jihen and those Mutt Yumu records. Yeah, I got to take out a second mortgage for them.
No, the good thing is, one of the good things that I have with a record store nearby is that he has a lot of connections with Japan. It's usually he goes like once a year, like, oh, I'm gonna go bring a lot of Japanese records, and it's like, oh, like a Japanese this, and you can do a list, and he brings out a ton. Let me do some, before I mention the biggest band, one of my favorites in here, I want to just make quick shout outs to this one. This one is from Naoya Matsuoka and Weezing. It's called September Wind. These ones are usually more laid back.
Yeah,
this one,
like sort of
which is really crazy, Spectrum.
Like, At the Beach record. So
Spectrum. Yeah, you kind of notice a trend with this Japanese fusion or city pop records, which is usually like completely opposite ambiances from Japan. Which
I can picture the sound they're getting. It's probably a lot of major key stuff. It's sort of mellow at points.
Like these other two, Prism, which is actually really good band. I've recently discovered them, and I'm like delving more into their.
There's a band that has an album called Prism. I'm forgetting who. I forget what band I like. There's a band I know that has an album called Prism. I think a post-rock band of some kind.
And if you give me just one moment, because I accidentally left the most important band I wanted to mention, and I don't have the visual cue for it, give me less than 1 minute.
Stand by. Oh, yeah, this is a work in progress, but I can just say now, I guess, for anyone who finds the stream that we might be doing them as streams again, or they may be recordings, but tier lists of and I talked about on the Prog Corner Sunday stream, Queen, like a Queen album tier list as a group, Death by Unicorn, and then another guy who's on YouTube. His name is Mike something. I forget his channel name. And then we're also going to do
the good thing about having this alphabetically ordered.
But anyway.
The good thing about having this alphabetically ordered is it's really fast to get them. And this band, this one might be the most smooth jazz of the bunch, but is definitely one of my favorites. The Square.
Okay.
I know it has like a really generic name. They I think in the mid 80s they changed their name to T Square, which is more easier, like less generic-y kind of sound of name. But these guys, this is a compilation called Make Me a Star, which is usually their earliest albums. and it's more like
Are a lot of these
laid-back.
albums on Spotify?
Yeah, it is. It is. I can link it up to them. Got most of them. Light Up, Magic, for example. I think you've kind of noticed a vibe with the covers, like very
What?
beat,
Oh yeah, there's a theme
beat
with
arrangement. But if I need
this
to
woman
pick,
in a bathing suit.
yeah, but if I need to pick their best, in my opinion, is Adventures.
Okay.
Like if you need to check out like one of them, is
there's a movie I like called The Square. Actually, one of the most underrated independent films I've seen in the last 20 years. But
one of the most interesting things about The Square at this point of their career was they usually had a wind section, which is I'm trying to remember Masaori Ando or one of those guys, but he discovered the iwi, the electronic wind instrument. So he changed everything to iwi. It was like really interesting stuff that he did with this record. Like there's also another one which I'm trying to find from a long time ago called Truth, which is another of their favorites, but it's more like 80s, really leaning on the smooth jazz part of the record.
Yeah, I mean the thing is I've discovered with 80s, and again a lot of it I haven't heard, but unless you're talking about Pat Metheny group generally, most of the 80s jazz just doesn't. I associate with Kenny G and like Spyro Gyra. I know the whole Dream Theater connection with Jay Beckenstein and Spyro Gyra and everything like that, but their original music always sounded very plasticky and like just purely major keys driven by soprano sax. And that's like my friends love Stanley Jordan. And like you want to say Eric Johnson's jazz, he's more like a blues artist. But I mean, there were some exceptions, but generally the 80s, as opposed to the 70s stuff, which the production was more organic, more acoustic, more, or not acoustic, but just there's a difference in the production alone and just some of the arrangements that you hear from a 70s versus 80s thing. So that's why I've struggled with 80s jazz, especially. I think it kind of came back more maybe in the 90s and 2000s.
Or even now. Or even now, you can notice, like in Wolfpack or Cory Wong or in TWRP, they kind of tap into that kind of a smoothie Japanese jazz kind of a flow.
Yeah, and I mean it's got its audience. I'm just not sure it's for me, but depends.
Check out those albums. Definitely, those albums might convince you to it. One of the great things about that one, the Square, that they generated like an intense rivalry with Cassiopeia.
So those two, those are like the biggest names, and I sing.
Yeah, but really cool live release that they got is this one that I just got really recently,
like a Blu-ray. Okay.
Yep.
The Square again. Okay.
Yeah, no, it's Cassiopeia versus
Cassiopeia.
The Square.
Okay. Yeah, I couldn't tell.
Yeah, it's versus.
All right.
What they do is like a battle of the bands kind of thing. Like they play one song, then they play another song, and they try to outdo the other one, and then they do unison.
Oh, both of them were on there. I see.
Yeah, it's basically.
It'd be like if Return to Forever and Mahavishnu, although they weren't really around the same time. I guess it'd be more like Yes and Genesis were like doing like a live thing together, or the thing Savatage did. When they went to Walk In, they had both lineups together simultaneously. Yeah. But yeah, I mean that'd be interesting. I suppose you got the two different groups kind of going at it, but it's just a matter of having the taste for that particular sound, and because I don't know the Japanese stuff, I probably don't know. But I'm not surprised because I mean I could see the Japanese sort of culture enjoying jazz and the jazz, especially jazz fusion. Even like electronic stuff, because there is electronic jazz too. You want to say like Ozra Tentacles almost we're tapping into some jazz. I mean, we're more like a space rock jam band at points, but they're again, if you're getting vague, that's sort of going into jazzy territory with these Odd Times and whatever. But yeah, I mean jazz fusion and jazz is the sort of thing where it's like I've always liked it, but it's never going to be like my favorite thing, but it's for the right mood. But I still feel like there's a lot, like even Dave Brubeck, there's so much music I've never heard of.
Yeah, definitely.
Bill Evans, a lot of these like not Lionel Hampton, but Keith Jarrett. The only thing about Keith Jarrett is I've heard that his personality is a bit of an
It's
acquired
wild.
taste. Yeah, and so that's why I kind of shied away from him a little bit. He's a little bit like Van Morrison, although I like Van Morrison. But
Yeah, but at least you go like, what was the name of that famous Keith Jarrett concert, the Cologne concert?
right,
Do that one, and if you're more into vibe, do more of a deep dive. I don't know
Mhm.
if I don't know if there's something on your StreamYard, but I'm trying to share the screen for a second.
Oh, right. Here we go. Add to. Let's see. Does this work?
Yeah. All right,
There we
perfect.
go.
So, like to do a mini summary, Cassiopeia, Mint Jams. Oh, you
Right.
might see it under this cover because the original cover is the car, but they changed it back to this one for some reason. Mint Jams, the Square, of course, Jorge Dalto, the one that I mentioned, Jun Fukumachi. Well, Hiromi that we talked
There's
about
Hiromi.
earlier.
Yeah.
This one, if you want something even more pop here, like a crossover between jazz fusion and city pop, Toshiki Kadomatsu would be like a great option. This one's my holy grail right now. Trying to get this one on vinyl or even on CD is ridiculous. Everyone's clamoring for her to do a repress or a remaster or whatever. Because right now, if you go to search
What year
prices
does that
on
one
this
come
one,
out? I
it's
don't
like
know that one.
$100 over.
I don't know that record. Flying Beagle.
Flying Beagle.
Yeah, I never heard it. When did that come out?
Oh, this is 87.
Wait, who is it? This isn't Hiromi. This is
No, this is Himiko Kikuchi.
okay. I was thinking you're showing me a Hiromi album.
Yeah, don't worry. Yeah, this one, September that I mentioned, Madagascar Lady, Prism,
Okay.
Optical Sunrise, the Takanaka albums, of course, and the T Square albums. This one's the other one that I'm trying to look for. This one, I can get it at a reasonable price still. But the problem with this that I've noticed when collecting all these sort of vinyls is they're getting up in price because most of them don't get repressed, and if they do,
No,
they
they
do
don't.
like really fancy color deluxe special edition kind of things, and then importing it from Japan, and it all racks up.
My cat's calling, unfortunately.
Yeah,
I'm in the weird spot where my wife just went to Chicago, of course, and was on a business trip. This is the first time, probably, I think, I've basically been on a night without her, since before we were married. Or maybe it was like right after we were married, but it's just kind of surreal. But what can you do? You
You
feel
have
like
the
a
whole house
bachelor
for
again.
yourself. You can order a pizza, and
well, I
you
did.
can order a
I
pizza for
actually,
yourself. And
I was hoping to get one of my favorite pizzas, and of course, the place that I normally get it didn't have it. But yeah, I know it's only for a few days, but in fact, that's going to give me more opportunity to finally at least make more progress around here, because my wife doesn't like when I'm spending time working on this. She just feel like I'm not giving her the attention that she deserves, in terms of she wants me to like watch some video with her or whatever.
It happens.
I know, but yeah, my cat is kind of calling. I don't know. Is there any more you wanted to show, or you wanted to go over?
That's pretty much about it, and I think we got really cool, like an hour of stream.
Right. We should. I mean, I don't know if we're gonna be able to do this, but if I think it would just be easier, even though I know the scheduled way we've done the group videos before. But I know that, I mean, maybe you don't know yet, but I'm going to be doing like a tier ranking with Death by Unicorn and this other guy. Probably of just a couple of, like, Queen we're going to talk about doing, and then ELP. I don't know if you're available, but that's another thing, is he wants to rank all our stuff together, but I don't know if we're going to do it through StreamYard like this. But we should do this if the time allows more often. I know
definitely.
people do streams frequently. It's just, I mean, people have to have the free time. You have to have the free time. We could go over. We were talking about doing like a Kevin Gilbert stream or something, or
really interesting. Like to grab most of the guys that we have in the mini Discord server, or maybe in the Facebook group, or people that are interested, or maybe even Bruno. Who knows?
Right, maybe if he'd be willing, or my friend Joseph Abadir. I think he's a little bit busy because he's like he resides where I live here in Minnesota, but I think he ended up going somewhere for romantic reasons. So so he's been busy. He does like weddings. He DJs weddings, so his evenings are not always available. But I know he's big into Kevin. He always just like gives me kind words and stuff. But yeah, or like a Dredge thing. Like if the new Dredge album comes out at the point we could do a video, we could do a live stream. That would be neat. We could get a bunch. Alan would be willing to do that, I'm sure. We could get a few people, and the gentleman who's part of our Discord, he would what's his name from the traversing board. I think we could just do this. It would be easier than trying to schedule the Zoom meetings, which are fine, but it's like, and then you got a 40-minute limit, and you got to do all the editing and everything like that. So but yeah, I probably need to attend to my kitty cats. I don't know, because I was gone for 5 hours, and then they don't realize that the mother isn't coming home for a few days.
They need to get used to the new environment.
Yeah, they need to get used to just being home with their father and for a few days. And but no, this is fun. We should try doing it again. And
and do check out those albums. I highly suggest them. I'm probably gonna make a comment on the list.
I need like a sampler like track from a bunch of them. And like what I'm planning to do on the channel. Although I must also confess to you that my laptop here is having some issues, and so that's what I was doing today after I dropped my wife off at the airport. I need to either replace it or get a new laptop. The thing is, they want to look at it and send it back to the manufacturer for a few days. It's like, well, how am I supposed to do anything online without my laptop? So they concluded, since it's still under warranty, I could actually, they could just take the hard drive and just put it in a replacement. But the replacement was like $200 extra. So
yeah,
I'm not sure, because I'm having problems with like playing back of Spotify, YouTube, and actually it seems like all the audio where I'm getting like this max headroom clipping here and there. And it's bad. So
but do check it out. It's probably even what you call it, high temperature issues might be.
It might be because I dropped this thing and the motherboard might have got damaged and the fans might have got damaged, so that could have something to do with it. But we're supposed to get weather here, but sometime in the next few days I'm probably going to do that, and I'm not sure if I'm gonna replace or I'll have two of them, but and I want to, all the stuff I want to do get back to doing on the channel. I'm still trying to do the albums of the year stuff, of course. 1996. I did get a bunch of vinyl in the mail.
Yeah, you got to do an unboxing.
What?
You got to do an unboxing on.
Yeah, just a vinyl.
What's the name of those videos? Here in Costa Rica we call it galeta. You get like a lot of vinyl from a record store.
This came in the mail yesterday.
Alex Lifeson.
So.
I think the D side of it has the new tracks, right?
Yeah, yes, it does. Which, of course, I don't know if I'm going to be listening to those unless I hook my turntable up, but maybe they'll be on Spotify. I'm not sure. Yeah, Cherry Lopez, Lullaby, Serbs, Groove, and Banjo Bob. So I don't even have My Favorite Headache. I know that came on Record Store Day a few years ago.
No, and it got reissued too. Exactly the same one, but without the Record Store Day stuff.
And I want to do. I mean, what was the other thing? Well, I want to do reviews of the new Cloud Cult, and then this. Have you heard of this band called SJ? I remember I sent that link to that band SJS.
SJS.
Well, it's like this main guy, Stuart something. He's from Australia, but then he collaborates with people from England. But he had like 2 records out previously where they did SJS, and I'm actually really surprised how much I liked it. It's sort of like Pink Floyd-ish. Space rock kind of thing, more melancholy stuff, a lot of piano. But I showed it to Brennan and he loved it. So I think it's more of a matter of like the prog scene that know this band like them, but they just don't know them. And I think I found them on Instagram. They were suggested to me on Instagram. So kind of a sleeper.
Yeah, the same thing how I got to Nowhere. I don't know if you heard about that.
Yeah, I listened to some of their. I like some of that. I mean, talk about jazz fusion. Some of the
that's another.
I know you told me they were here, and
I'm getting influenced by it.
I like some of their stuff, although they're kind of more in the they're jazzy, but they're like, who's that guy that worked with Kimbra?
Lewis Cole, maybe?
No. He was big he's like a producer. I mean, it's like Jagged Jazz is a little bit like that, or you know I'm talking about.
Supersonic Revolutions. Now that you mentioned that album's really,
really Kamikaze. That would be also jazz. They're Jazz Kamikaze.
Jazz Kamikaze. That one's
not. I want to say not Thundercat. Thundercat. Yep. It's kind of in that vein. Nowhere to be remind me a little, or the guy that did that tour where he talked about his like bandmates got COVID. He did that documentary and everything. I forget that he's like a well-known musician in the jazz and like the Berkeley scene. His band is sort of in the same similar vein of Nowhere, where it is jazzy, but it's also like hip hop and like some other genres. If you know what I'm talking about, Adam.
Let me see if I can search it.
Yes. Not Adam Levin, but where they were losing money. Adam, not Ledbetter. There's a lot of Adams who do jazz. Adam Neely.
Yep.
Yeah, that Nowhere kind of reminded me of
band.
Like a mixture of that, Jagged Jazzist, and like and Thundercat, sort of in that sort of jazzy, experimental, electronic hip hop kind of stuff. Maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit of my impressions of Nowhere, but I did like some of the music I sampled from them, and I kind of wish I had gone to that show that was in April here.
At least that's the good thing. You guys, at least in Minnesota, you get really cool jazz fusion shows. Here it's metal, basically.
We have people like Dean McGraw, Galactic, those local musicians, and then we do get, because there's people that like to bring people in. They spend the money. You're right. I mean, I've seen. Honestly, I've seen my majority of music of being live jazz, but I think that jazz to me actually is best live, even though there's fantastic records. To me, when you see
one of the main
live,
reasons why I recommend live records, it's because you can feel their energy.
There's
in
just
studio,
more.
they tend to be very clinical.
Yes, it's you feel like you're there more than some live records. I know what you mean. But
I think that was the main way I got it, for example, into King Crimson, which in some part you can consider it a jazz fusion-y band, depending on who you ask.
Again, they go into jazzy territory, but it's like, I mean, what would you call like the crafty guitarist stuff? I mean, it's guitar music, it's acoustic guitar music, but it's got jazz. Like you talk about the roots of jazz. I mean, Wes Montgomery, Django Reinhardt, Charlie Christian, those guys played a lot of acoustic stuff. It wasn't all electric. So, I mean, I don't know. I kind of had this vision of myself. I thought this years ago when I turned to be like, when I'm retirement age or a little bit older in my 70s, maybe I will be basically listening to jazz and basically spending all my time watching old films, which that still might happen, but I don't know.
Well, the good thing is there's a lot of music to explore on that.
Well, that's the problem with the good thing and the bad thing. Well, the late Sean Malone made that comment. It's like, if he tried to listen to even 10% of the music that he wanted to listen to, he would never by the end of his life. Now, unfortunately, he took his own life, but no. So, but yeah, I don't know. Maybe what I'll do is I'll do a jazz fusion tracks list at some point. Maybe we could do a stream for that.
Yeah, that would be really cool.
Because I can tell you right now, you'll have like Race with the Devil on the Spanish Highway and Yolanda You Learn. Those would be in my top 10 for sure. But yeah, I want to do that. I want to do this. The other stuff I've been brainstorming, like the albums of the year stuff. And I was talking to the people at the computer store. I want to do those documentaries still, but I want to do the movies list. I don't know if you know Massey Entertainment.
Massey Entertainment.
It's a YouTube channel. It's this guy named Brian. I think his name is Brian Massey. But he's been doing these like movie top 100 all-time movies or favorite movies with these three other guys. He also has been doing like specific years and doing people's top albums. He was doing like a tournament before. There's a guy named Sam St. John who I got turned on by his channel to him, but I like his channel. And he's been like with music, with albums. Their taste isn't prog specifically, although I think him and his people on his channel do like some prog, but like Pink Floyd. But I mean, that's why I made movies of the year list, just like did the album stuff. And although I've the problem with movies is I'm trying to remember. I don't have a collection of DVDs like where I've watched like every movie I've watched. So trying to remember like every movie I've watched it gets to be a bit challenging. You have to do some research.
That's the other thing. I've talked to you before. Do a Last.fm account, sync it. Do a Letterboxd account, sync it to whatever you watch.
You sync Last.fm, but Last.fm doesn't have, or it's a Letterboxd. That's right. So they were talking about Letterboxd on, I think it was on Reddit, because they were saying that Rate Your Music doesn't have an app, and they're talking about how Letterboxd finally added an app for smartphones. But I mean, they're on Rate Your Music has movies too, but I suppose I could try going on to Letterboxd.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is, it's trying to remember. Okay, this movie I saw when I was 21, and some afternoon on television, on watching cable, movies I rented when I was in high school with my friends. It's just there's a lot of movies like that you'll never finish it. You can maybe get to be like 80-90%, but
but the good thing is,
like, if you do
at least the good thing is start somewhere. That's the most important thing. Start somewhere.
Right. But the nice thing about doing the movies list is that I'm not going to end up having to like revisit all these movies. I might just kind of read the synopsis just to remember and look at some of the cast. But whereas like I'm trying to remember details about an album I last listened to in the year 2008. It's like, all right, what was the song? But anyway, so that's kind of my plans. I don't know what else you have coming up, the plans the rest of this week, next weekend.
Yeah, probably the one that we're kind of dreading right now, for example, over the Images and Words Discord server, that we usually do new releases on Fridays.
Right.
This August it's been good releases. We usually tend to do like 3 or 4 every Friday, but this weekends that are coming up, they're coming in hot because it's Seal and Order, Mir, King Crow, Motorcycle, Lepra, Spent Knee, Tigran Hamayas, and Nectar, Winterson is like, and they're coming out in like
this coming week is a really, really busy new release week.
Yeah, it's gonna get heavy.
The 16th is what? The 16th this Friday. I only have 2 things listed on the calendar on the Dream Theater forums: Dark Tranquillity and Tim Bonus. But the week after, you're right.
The Tim Bonus one got delayed until September.
Oh, did it? Okay, interesting.
Yep. If you want to add more to that one, I suggest you check out Ritual and Troika, which are
right. I know people like
next week. And Nested Shapes, if you like EDM kind of
Ritual.
Stuff. But yeah, I know, these previous weeks have been like really barren, but these 2 last weeks, they're all in. Like all the record labels are like, oh, let's release everything
the rest of this month. I mean, I haven't done a calendar update in a while. There is stuff the rest of this month. Last week to me was really busy because you had Cloud Cult and then these other stuff that Esperanza Spalding thing. Speaking of jazz, that with that Milton Nascimento. And then you had the SJS and then that band Airlands, who I saw open for Ben Knee. So it was kind of like, well, there's a lot more releases than I would expected. But I feel like, though, after the stuff that came out in July, a lot of my like sort of super like anticipated records have already come out this year. That stuff that hasn't been announced, I'm still waiting on. There aren't any like big. The Pure Reason Revolution, I guess. But I'm not like
got a new patron now.
I mean, I'm looking forward to some of this stuff. I'll listen to it, but there isn't any like blue chips at this point. I mean, the Dream Theater, of course, but there's not a Reign of Kinda. Although I missed the town hall last night because I was busy doing stuff with my wife to get ready for her trip, and supposedly they were going to make some kind of announcement. I haven't gone to the Patreon today. That Reign of Kinda record is just around the corner, supposedly. So. But there's nothing right now set in stone that's like announced. Okay, Reign of Kindo, the Deer Hunter, Marillion. There's nothing for my taste that is like super. The Cloud Cult was probably the biggest one. So
Frost record.
Yeah, but I'm not in. I don't know. People love Frost. I know. To me, it's overly synthy. But I know people that
their latest one. DNH has, even though if it's synthy, they really kind of honed into more like laid back kind of jammy vibes.
Check out the latest. I have the Frost album on here. When did that get announced? I mean, I know there's been talk about a Frost album.
Yep, it's called
October.
Life in the Wires.
But it's not. Does it have a release date?
Yep, it's October 18th.
All right, I'll have to fix that. Yeah. There's a lot of stuff that's like title confirmed or, that could come out, but I mean Sunya from the Deer Hunter, but that may not be till next year at this point because they've been so quiet about it. And the Brian Scary stuff is really a big deal. I mean, that or you put Self in there. Those two are a big deal to me. But I sometimes I like it when that happens when when you're anticipating something a lot, then you get disappointed. Whereas when you're not expecting something and it surprises you, I think I find more of my favorite albums every year. I don't expect to like them or to love them, and then they end up, like that SJS record. It's like I would never have known who the hell this is, and SJS, they're another one of these cliche prog bands. No, it's actually pretty good. I don't know, that to me it seems like works for me better than when I have this record I'm super like obsessed with and getting all the singles, and then suddenly it's out and it's like, all right, well, I've already heard it.
Yeah, of course.
But I mean, Frost. I mean, people talk about. I'll check it out. Is it Andy Edwards? Of course, there's been a lot of the buzz about the thing with him and Scott. I know it's sort of tongue in cheek and not being fully serious, but from the prog corner, is he still drumming with Frost? I don't know.
I think the one who's playing on the latest album is Craig
Blundell. Blundell.
Yeah, Craig Blundell. I think he's still playing with
Steven Wilson. Okay.
Yeah,
that makes some sense.
The thing with Craig, we were mentioning this in the Frost Discord earlier because they, of course, and Jim occasionally drops in and is like, well, pretty much it's a super band because it's mostly Jem who does his main work, but John Mitchell is with Asia, and Craig Blundell is constantly with Steve Hackett, and Nate, their bassist, is regular session tour player in the UK. I think he's with ABC or with some big band.
Where he's paying his mortgage, right?
Yeah, it's a business.
No, it is.
Constantly working.
I believe it. I mean, I believe that. I know that Frost are a band that people love, and they've only released a few records, so it's a little bit like Moon Safari last year, where the prog scene, the people went apeshit over them. It's like new album. We've been waiting for 15 years. Well, we're gonna get Galactic Cowboys, of course, but
that's another one
since it's been finished, and we're gonna hopefully get a Dredge album. Some of these long-awaited records
that'll come at some point.
Yeah, I know. I mean, at least Dredge is active on social media, as opposed to some of these bands like Daniel Victor from Never Running White Lights. We don't hear from him for 6 months or a year. It's like we've been waiting for the follow-up that's been 14 years now, 13 years or whatever. But I don't know. It's one of those things where it's like, how old am I going to be? Am I going to be collecting Social Security at the point we get the next Dredge or Never Ending White Lights album?
It'll happen eventually.
I think I've kind of learned that lesson over the years that just don't expect a lot, and then you'll be surprised.
And the other thing, for example, the albums of the year, not the albums of the year, but the year list that you've been doing. We've also been having an event. I don't know if you've noticed that we're doing like the decade album, 2000s, that we play every single day at a specific time. An album.
Yeah. I know. When I get to doing those years, it'll be a lot of rehash. It's going to be a lot of rehashing.
Oh yeah, definitely. But there's going to be the obvious part.
I told you what I want to do
and stuff like that.
The progressive art rock list is that I ultimately want to make documentaries, but my next step in that is to make just basically a telling of the calendar of when the releases came out. And I'm going to do one video per year, basically. So the year 2000. Okay, so this album from Self, this album from Doves came out this date. And that'll be sort of telling, rather than, because I know the thing I really want to do is those sort of animated voiceover kind of crafted documentary style things, but I'm not skilled and experienced enough with the software to do it yet. But that's my ideal situation. Just so, because of like a lot of people with certain styles, like the Prog Report doing the book and everything like that. This sort of style of music doesn't have anything documented other than Lorenzo from Alt Prog Core, who did a book about it a few years back. We don't have anything, and it would be nice to have. And then 20, 30, 40 years from now, if someone's curious, that band, the Mars Volta, what were they like and what bands did they influence? Then you can go back, you can read and you can research the albums, or you could just watch this little 30-minute documentary that I made. But anyway, well, it's 9 o'clock.
As I mentioned, I'm all willing to help.
Yeah, no, you've helped me a lot. I really thank you for that. You've really been a great help for doing stuff. And I mean, the YouTube stuff is, it's a hobby, you know, but I'm almost at 400 subscribers, believe it or not. That's more than I figured I would have been at, you know, a few
And
years
with
ago.
701 videos.
Right. Yeah. I'm really more like accumulating videos where this person I know named Amy Y, she just hit 500 and she has 1,300. So I'm actually on pretty good projection given her projection. So she's big and she does a lot of like monkeys and like entertainment stuff on like Keanu Reeves. So, but no, I mean, she was able to kind of persevere and she's now at 500 videos. My wife has some reservations about her because some of the monkeys information she gives isn't always 100% accurate. You know, that sometimes people don't necessarily, they put out stuff and it, you know, what can you do? You can't stop people from making videos, right?
Exactly. But that's a good thing. And the thing that I mostly love about your videos is because it's really specific topics that many people don't cover, because usually I'm gonna do a big review on this classic Pink Floyd album, or I'm gonna do a big one on this highly weighted Dream Theater record, or a tier list from this big band. And it's like, yeah, it's cool and everything, but
how many other people have done those? I know
exactly.
it's sort of
a dime a dozen.
A blessing and a curse, because that's the reason why people don't find them, but they find them over longer windows of time. I'm thinking that maybe if I get to 500, I'll do like a Rush special or something, you know, or I was thinking I probably should just rank the Rush albums that people would want to watch that, you know, that would, you know, whatever. Then you get negative comments though, and that's why I might start disabling them.
Well, that's what make it fun. I usually when they do tier lists and I'm doing like, well, this is mine, and people usually respond to me like, that's a weird tier list.
They didn't like my Marillion rankings, and then now I've been getting a few negative comments about that America review. I just disabled comments on it, even though it found like 500 views. It's like, you know, it's that sort of comes with the territory, I guess. But I don't know why people are so sensitive about someone on YouTube giving their 2 cents. But
it's because
I am as least tactful as I can be. Occasionally, I get a little bit thrown off by it. It's like if you're taking a shot at Kevin Gilbert, it's not factual. I have to say something, but you know,
maybe, who knows? The other thing that we're also waiting, the archives. Who knows what they're gonna release now? Hopefully, something out of the
right. That's what we're gonna. I mean, this fall. You know, the shaming of multi-disc is probably next year, as that thing said. But we're gonna get probably 6 more archive released, KMG archives.
Yeah, and hopefully they're gonna touch something Tuesday Music Nightclub related, or at least in that early 90s something.
I know that's kind of it, because that's right at the sweet spot where Kevin was sort of, I don't say he was peaking, but you know, that stuff with the Tuesday Night Music Club, and just to hear him, especially if he does some vocals on some of those, I would just, I mean, maybe it'd be like a one-off, because I'll admit that, well, we get those archive releases. I don't necessarily go back to them 10 times. I'll listen to them a couple times and then I'm good. Maybe I'll go back to them a year later. But I do want to do the shaming thing though. I mean, when the shaming multi-disc comes out, that whole thing I did with Thud, that will be an exercise, but I'm thinking that will be sometime in 2025. Maybe you and I should do it together. I don't know.
Sure. I'm up for it.
I mean,
it's going to be interesting because of the ton of demos or stuff. Hopefully they're going to release about it.
We're definitely gonna get demos. We're gonna get like different versions of like City of the Sun, and we're gonna get Miss Broadway, and we're gonna get some of the stuff that ended up on Caviar probably in there that are different versions. So it's gonna be a lot of kind of crossing over, I'm sure. But you know, I mean, each one of those, I was just doing one a week, and I was like spending about an hour and a half listening to them, pausing, writing stuff down, listening, you know. Because those Thud the demos of the Thud, some of that stuff is I like more than the actual versions on the album. So,
same thing happened with the Caviar stuff.
We should, that's kind of the plans for the near future. But thank you for finding the stream or the recording of the stream. It doesn't look like we had anyone actually streaming. But give us your jazz fusion list or jazz list. I'd love to see that. If you didn't see the previous, I'll link the my 50 list. But thank you for watching, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, God.